Hi, Steve Harrison with Author Success, and I have another great interview of an author making a big difference in the world. Colonel Bob Sholly is with me. He's the author of Young Soldiers, Amazing Warriors. Bob, great to have you. You know, I love asking people who write quality books like yours. You've won many awards with this book. Why did you write it?
You know, I wrote the book for the men that I served with. I was a historian, and I always kept a journal. And I had these little 3x5 notebooks that I kept in my pocket. And during the day or in the evening or whenever I had time, I would sit down and jot down the events of the day or whatever had happened that was interesting. The guys saw me writing in this, and so when we came back from Vietnam, they kept asking me, when is the book coming out? When is the book coming out? And so I realized that our ranks were thinning, and I also realized that I'd better get busy writing the book if, in fact, I was going to do that. So about 5 years ago, I decided that I would do the research, pick up my journals, and write the book. And I did that. And it fortunately came out very, very well, and everybody seems to be very pleased with the final product.
And so that got you going, and then what have you found for people like me who grew up in the suburbs, never, you know, I have not faced a bullet, I haven't been on the battlefield, you know, and I'm grateful to men such as yourself who have really served our country in that way. What are you finding kind of is just the reaction of people, ordinary civilians maybe who've never even served in the military?
Well, you know, it's interesting that you should ask that question, because what happens when people read the book, and I get this when I do book signings or public speaking or that venue, people come up and say, I didn't realize what soldiers really went through when they go to war. And while my book is not really about all the gore and all the battles and the firefights and all of that during the whole book, it gives them a better feel for what their soldiers or their military service people go through when their country sends them to war. And so right now, the majority of the feedback that I've been getting is one of appreciation, of telling the story about these men and what they experienced when they went off to war.
Well, you do such a great job of really giving the narrative and putting us there. You know, I was actually at a meeting today, and I was just reading one of your accounts of this battle that you open up with, and you're kind of under the shrubs, and you're getting inundated with enemy fire, and, you know, and the meeting had to like start, and I didn't want to do the meeting. I was pulled into the book. I mean, you're so good at really putting us there. Give a sense of just give an example of just the kinds of stories you talk about, or maybe one example of that you find people are really enjoying in reading the book.
Well, the battle scenes are very interesting because it does, in fact, take the reader to what we experienced when we were going through those battles. But some of the things that readers really get a kick out of are some of the more humorous things. We had, remember that we were over there in 1966 and 67 for my first tour. And we had captured 3 Viet Cong, and we were going to send them back to the rear for interrogation. We had a resupply day, which means that the helicopters came out, all the seats of the helicopter are taken out, and so you have this empty floor. We blindfolded the prisoners, we tied their hands, we left their feet so they could walk, and we put these 3 individuals on the helicopter with the crew chief. As the helicopter began to take off and began to gain altitude to about 50 feet, one of these guys decided that he had had enough fun and jumped out. We watched as he fell and hit the ground. When he hit the ground, it broke his bonds on his hand, so he ripped off his blindfold and scurried into the jungle. We chased him, but we didn't ever find him. When the helicopter came back, it went on to take the other two. When the helicopter came back, the pilot had taken a C ration piece of cardboard, and he had written a message on and hung it on the back of his seat saying, 2 out of 3 VC prefer to fly with us. And we all thought that was pretty funny.
Oh, I love it. So there's a lot of humor here. In fact, one thing Murphy's laws, that are kind of woven into the book, where you just have a real, like here, Murphy's law: no combat ready unit has ever passed inspection. No inspection ready unit has ever passed combat. So you have these great witticisms that I think talk about that. Is the humor a big part of what it takes to kind of get through something like that? How does humor play into just the whole experience? And
in combat, you're not getting shot at or shooting at people all the time. As a matter of fact, in between those moments of terror, what you have is a very humdrum, routine, natural, just way of life. And as a result, many, many things happen that are relatively humorous. Now, unfortunately, some of that humor becomes black humor, where people are make fun of dying or with their chances of returning or whatever. But at any rate, some of these stories that people tell are rather humorous in and of themselves. I remember one time when I had told a squad leader that I wanted a prisoner. We needed to have some information about the enemy, and so I sent him out. I identified on the map where I wanted him to set up this ambush. And we talked about the arrangements, and I asked him as an afterthought, do you speak Vietnamese? And he said, no. Well, I didn't speak Vietnamese either, but I did have a phrase book that had come in handy in the past. And I read through there, and I found one that said, Dung Lai, which means stop. Well, so I figured that if he was able to say Dung Lai, that he would be able to get his message across and capture the individual. Well, there was another phrase that had gotten involved into the GI language called Didi Mao, and that had just gotten into language, and every GI knew that one. And that means run away quickly or to move out of here. Like, here comes the sergeant, let's DD out of here. Or it's time to DD home, or at any rate, every GI knew that. So the squad leader went off muttering, Dung Lai, Dung Lai, Dung Lai. Well, he went out and set up his ambush, and he came back and reported the next morning. And he said, sir, he said, it all fell apart. I said, what happened? He said, well, we got set up in the right place, and here came this guy bopping down the trail with his rifle on his shoulder, and I jumped out in the middle of the trail with my rifle pointed at him, and I was so excited that I said the only Vietnamese that I really knew, and I said, Didi! And he did. And we didn't catch him. Now, I moved the ambush, but nobody else came down the trail. He thought that I was really going to be angry about it, but I thought it was rather funny. So we went over the arrangements, and I said, if you had to do it again, what would you do different? And he said, I would pick somebody else to do the Vietnamese part.
Well, one of the things I know you're doing a lot of speaking now, and you're, I think you've had an extensive background, certainly as a colonel in the military. You've had a lot of business experience. I read, in your book that you were, at one point you said you were leading like 100 or 150 men to go against 500. What's it take to, when you face those kinds of odds? I mean, what's something about maybe leadership or planning, or just being a leader that most of us say in business who are, or we're leaders, but what are some of the kinds of things, just give me an example of the kind of thing that you talk about when you speak that people like me who are leading in business, because I don't have your background, we typically wouldn't realize?
Steve, there's all kinds of leadership. The United States military is one of the better leadership organizations in the world. But it all hinges upon teamwork. If you don't have a team, you don't have anything to lead. Now, in civilian life, it's a little bit different, but soldiers learn about leadership from day one. Somebody is always in charge of you. Even if there's only two individuals, one person is in charge. And so it is ingrained as you go up through the ranks that somebody is in charge, and you learn those leadership lessons with every assignment and every school that you go to. In civilian life, it's completely different. An individual goes into the workforce, and I don't care whether he comes out of high school or whether he comes out of college or whatever, he doesn't have any training in leadership. And he may be smart enough to observe other people who are managers who might have gotten into leadership positions, and he might actually do a pretty good job of being a leader. But he doesn't fully understand the necessity of building a team. And the military, that is in fact what you have to do. The actual business of leadership is developing that team. Now, we talked about a little bit about or you asked the question about leading 150 guys against 500. If you were in combat in Europe, you probably would have a better idea for what the odds were, what your enemy was organized with. But in the jungle, you didn't know whether you were facing 2 guys or 2,000. So as a result, what you had to depend upon was the teamwork and the training that you had given those individuals or that you had received. And that is one of the things that I teach when I speak to leaders, is that they have to develop an environment where their employees or their sub-leaders or managers can build a team that feels that the whole thing is part of their job, that they're enfranchised, and the success of the corporation means just as much to them because it's what they did and they accomplished as much as it is to the executives.
Now, you've done both, so let me ask you, what's harder, to lead people in war or lead people in business?
No question about it. It's far more difficult to lead people in business than it is in the military. As I indicated, from day one, an individual soldier or airman or sailor or whatever branch learns about leadership. They learn that they have to be a good follower in order to be a good leader. In civilian life, you don't understand that. It takes some time and experience in the workforce before you can finally understand that. So I found it very much more difficult to lead civilians who didn't have the same background that I did, and as a result, it wasn't they that had to change. It was I that had to change in order to understand their culture before I could then build and develop these teams. But civilians are far more difficult because it's sort of like herding cats.
Yeah, well, it makes sense, that they don't have the training. I think that's why it's great that you're doing what you do with the speaking, with the training, and certainly there's so many lessons from your book, and I know you've won a number of awards. Talk about the success of the book. I know you don't like to brag, but you've won a number of awards for this.
It's actually rather surprising. We submitted the book to several book festivals and competitions in hopes that we would get some feedback that we could use in publicity and public relations. As a result, we have received several. Actually, we just got notification of one yesterday that would make it number 21. But it has won a grand prize. They flew my wife and I out to California to receive the award. That was very gratifying. Some of the more prestigious book festivals have given it the title of Best Book for 2014. We were very, very gratified at that. And the awards just keep coming in.
Well, I think it's a great book for somebody who just wants a great read. They learn history. They learn, you really pull them into the story. So it's people like me who aren't familiar with war and battle in terms of just firsthand experience. You give that to us. Talk a little bit about what's the book. So, what are people finding who have been in the military? Whether they've been active duty or they haven't. Maybe they felt good about their service. Maybe they don't, or they've had a tough. What's been the range of kind of reactions from different types of military folks?
I've received a great deal of positive feedback from both active duty people and veterans as well. As a matter of fact, 2 active duty battalions have purchased bulk copies of the book to use as a textbook within their advanced leadership courses that they conduct. That made me feel really good. Some of the other readers, veterans, said, I thought that I was okay. But when I started reading the book, a lot of memories and emotional issues started coming up, and I realized that I wasn't okay. And so I'm going to go to counseling because I need to learn how to cope with some of those things. Some of the other individuals that have read it said, we're in counseling at VA, but we can't articulate what we experienced as well as the book does. And so we bought the book and we gave it to our counselors so they could understand better what we did experience. So I'm beginning to get a lot of good feedback from that, as well as from them and their families. A lot of people talk about not understanding what Daddy did in the war because he won't talk about it. And I have to admit that I was exactly like that. When my kids wanted to know what I did in Vietnam, my first tour, I simply didn't want to talk about it. However, it's been 40-some-odd years, and my wife managed to get me to the wall, which raised all kinds of emotional issues, but also helped me cope with some of them. But the book also has given me an opportunity and platform to vent some of those emotional issues. And that is what is happening to some of these families of individuals who are in the book or who have similar experiences. And one wife told me that it gave her a more positive platform, a basis upon which to talk about the things that her husband had experienced in Vietnam, and it had taken their relationship to a whole new different level. These sort of feedbacks are just really, really gratifying, and apparently people are beginning to really, really like the book.
Wow. Well, that's fantastic. Well, congratulations on all the success that you're having. The book is a great read, whether you've had military experience or not. You want to learn lessons of leadership or just really be pulled into a wonderful story. It's Young Soldiers, Amazing Warriors. It's available on Amazon and Kindle, but also at youngsoldiersamazingwarriors.com. Bob, thanks for joining me today.
Steve, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.